talking to Cathy Edwards from Ottawa. She is one of the directors of CACTUS, and we're going to talk about what CRTC is doing lately, and what exactly CRTC is, what their mandate is perhaps, and who are these appointed commissioners that are regulating the public broadcasting. So first I'd like to ask Cathy to give us a little bit of a background of where do you come from, how are you involved with community television?
I've volunteered in community TV for over 20 years. I guess I started volunteering when I was in university. And when I graduated from university with an English degree, I was interested to know how I could apply that and got interested in film and TV production, and it was a great launch pad for me to learn. And then I got a job full-time as a volunteer coordinator, so training the public to make their own television programs at Shaw's headquarters community channel in Calgary in the 1990s, and worked there for 4 years till the late 90s was when satellites started to come in, and cable companies saw community channels as a way that they could distinguish themselves in the marketplace from satellite, which didn't have local channels, and started essentially kicking the public off their community channels and professionalizing the content, and also regionalizing content. In order to pay all professional staff in somewhere like Calgary, they found that they had to close small studios in outlying areas and consolidate resources in bigger cities. So and at that point, I became I wasn't really planning it in my life plan, but I became an activist just because I'd seen the value of community TV and access to media training to groups in Calgary, like the deaf community, girls that had been selling themselves on the street, learning to make documentaries about their experience. And I'd just seen the impact on people and what an enormous loss that was. And so for a number of years, I traveled around the world making a shoestring documentary series about what community TV looks like in other countries. So we'd have some sort of context to understand what was going on here. And that led to, in 2010, preparing a report about my findings for the CRTC's Community TV Policy Review, where a lot of the problems with our system were raised.
I see, Cathy, you mentioned what a loss it was. Are you referring to the problem of the girls in the street, or are you referring to the community television?
No, the loss of community TV as an open access platform that people could take for granted would be there for them in the community to learn about media and also express themselves and get their messages out. And
that loss was a gradual thing that happened, or was all of a sudden quite a loss?
It depends. It was sudden in Calgary. We, at the end of the programming season one summer, we were just sent out 400 letters to all of our volunteers from all the previous 20 years saying, we're changing our format to a professional news format. Don't come back in the fall. The classic vote letter. But I think it was more gradual, depending where you were, and it's still ongoing. Like we get calls from groups in Canal, BC, and different places saying that it's just much more difficult to get on the air, and we try to arm them with the legislation so they can, tap the page and say, hey, we're supposed to have this right, and then the doors tend to open up a little more. But it shouldn't be that way.
Okay, so
it should be right.
Yeah, so we lost a lot of the help, coordinating help from the cable companies and the TV channel. But you have continued doing some advocacy and representing the community television groups through this new organization, CACTUS. Can you tell us a little more about CACTUS?
Well, CACTUS stands for the Canadian Association of Community Television. It's now an incorporated nonprofit association, and we regularly intervene in CRTC hearings to comment about things touching community television. An important thing is that the users and stations, and because so few Canadians now have proper viable access to an open community television channel, that we represent both the small number of genuine community TV license holders that there are in Canada. There's 9. So there's 9 communities in Canada that hold a license to produce their own TV, and it's a non-profit association that holds the license, and it's supposed to be open to the public to express themselves. But we also represent, because most of the country doesn't have access to channels like that, individual Canadians that are upset about that, to help them get new channels set up educate them about what community TV is, or to help them get access to a cable community channel like a group like yours in Vancouver, Pedro. Okay. So it's a combination of stations we represent as well as individual users of stations.
You mentioned that there are a few stations that are run by the community rather than by the cable stations.
That's
you mentioned
right.
half a dozen of them or so across Canada.
There's 9.
9 of them, and I find that it's very difficult for any group in any city to compete with the established TV stations, because they have well, the CRTC regulation that does not allow for somebody else to compete with the established management of the cable company. Well,
is that what you mean? Are you saying it's hard for an independent group to compete with the cable community channel?
Yeah, to compete for the management of the cable channel. I thought
right.
that those 9 organizations that you mentioned, are they actually managing the community channel through a cable company?
Yes, they hold the. In fact, there's 10. I should correct. 9 of them have over-the-air licenses, so that means they've got their own broadcast tower, and they transmit over the air, and they're automatically under CRTC policy also carried on cable. And they, starting this fall, again, thanks to CRTC, a CRTC ruling last year, they'll be carried on satellite for the first time too.
But it's almost impossible for any group to challenge that management right, because CRTC regulation does not apply unless the cable company does not want to do the management of that channel. So if they,
that's right. Yeah. That's right. If there isn't a cable community channel in a licensed area, another group can apply to have that 2%. But it's really silly in that to meet the requirement of having a community channel in an area, a cable company is supposed to show that 60% of the programming seen in that area is really local to the area.
And community access does not necessarily mean local productions, because you mentioned 60% of local production, but the cable company can produce their own professionally paid for local productions too. So what is the percentage that local?
I think we're up to, this was one small theoretical on paper gain we made at the Community TV Policy Review in 2010. And that was that it used to be that 60% of a cable community channel's production had to be local to the cable license area, and 30%, so half of the local amount, had to actually be made by members of the community living there. It couldn't just be all made by cable company staff. In fact, almost nowhere in Canada were cable companies even meeting that, in my view, fairly pathetic minimum, given that the point of these channels was to enable public access. But the CRTC did hear that part of the message, and they've been phasing in an increase. But again, there's a problem of enforcement. There was the biggest ever audit of cable community channels done last year, following a complaint made by CACTUS, by us, saying, look, most license areas aren't meeting these minimum, and the CRTC summoned the logs of different cable companies in certain license areas across the country. And we examined them and found in almost every case they're not meeting these access minimum, and often, about 50% of the time, not meeting the local minimum either. And nothing's been done. There hasn't been any, final word about this from the CRTC. So it's kind of discouraging. We spent 6 weeks analyzing those logs to come to those conclusions, and CRTC has just been quiet.
So the rule is there, but it doesn't have to be observed.
Apparently. There's problems of enforcement, and there's continual loopholes. Every time cable companies go for a license renewal, they ask for some special exception to the rules, and they're almost always given it.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about who the CRTC is, who appoints them, the commissioners, and what is there a problem with commissioners that are perhaps more favoring the industry rather than the public, the average citizen?
Well, in some ways, I'm kind of a neophyte to understanding all the relationships between government and the CRTC and industry, but I So what I'm going to repeat is the sort of thing that you hear spoken a lot around Ottawa, and I'm only really beginning to have first-hand experience of some of it. So if you keep that in mind with these comments. But the CRTC, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, is meant to regulate not only broadcasting, so television and radio, but also telecommunications, so cell service, mobile service, and so on. And there's some talk about merging those functions as well, since it's all kind of blurry now. You can watch video on your phone. And the CRTC consists of, legally it consists of commissioners. I think there's about 16 at any given time that are appointees. They're supposed to, the CRTC as a whole is supposed to have an arm's length relationship with government, but the commissioners are government appointees. Most people view them as being mainly a, what do you call it, like a complaints mediator, so that when big companies have arguments with one another, they're almost like a business mediator. And so public interest groups often feel, well, where the heck is the public in that? And in fact, I've heard people say that CRTC staff actually talk about their clients as being the license holders, the people that hold the broadcasting and telecommunications licenses, i.e. the businesses are their clients, not the public. And the other issue that's been brought up when people question how well the CRTC is doing a job of representing the public is that most or many CRTC commissioners, if you look at the CRTC's website and click, their biographies, are coming from the industry, in particular the cable and broadcast distribution undertaking industry. And then when they leave the CRTC, they go back to that industry. So, it's hard. I think any logical person would come to the conclusion it's hard to be truly dependent when you spend all your life in that milieu and you know that your bread and butter is coming from there when you leave the CRTC too. So, that sets up an extremely difficult environment for them to function objectively, I think, and for the public to, expect their issues to be understood.
Let's continue with the issue that's about the shutdown of this 623 over-the-air transmitter sites on July 31st. So what is the problem with shutting down of this transmitting sites?
Well, the CBC, our national broadcaster, has about 6 times as many transmission sites, so towers and over-the-air transmitters, as any other single broadcaster in Canada. So I think Global and CTV each have in the order of 60 or 80 sites each. So over 600 is a lot, and that's because back in the 1970s there was a huge push by Heritage Canada that the CBC should reach every Canadian. So every community over 500 people got a broadcast tower built. So it was a massive project on the scale of building the railroad. And they were broadcasting for the last 20 or 30 years in analog format. And last year, as is happening in other countries around the world, the CRTC said, hey, television around the world is going to digital technologies. We all, have digital camcorders now. We want to broadcast over the air with digital pictures. They're higher quality, they're high definition. You can also pack more channels digitally into the space that one analog channel used to take. So for a whole bunch of reasons, the CRTC decreed that broadcasters, at least in Canada's biggest 20 or so cities, had to stop broadcasting in analog and start broadcasting in digital. So this year, because the CBC just got a massive budget cut from the federal government, they said, well, we're going to shut off all of our 623 analog transmitters that are still out there in the field. So except for the 20 or so cities where we upgraded our transmitters to digital last summer, so in your case, the nearest one's Vancouver. That's the only place in BC where a CBC transmitter was upgraded to digital. Everywhere else in Canada, people are going to lose free over-the-air TV. And it's happening simultaneously here in Ontario. Our educational broadcaster, TVO, announced that they're shutting off 100 of their little repeater sites across the province. But in TVO's case, in April, they sent out letters to every one of those affected communities and said, hey, we can't afford to maintain these anymore. Would you like them? And they're actually giving their towers to the communities. And why would a community want a tower? You could keep, for it's a couple $1,000s a year, maybe to supply power to one of those old analog transmitters. You can keep CBC going indefinitely. You can use the tower for a community TV or radio channel. If you want to do the upgrade to digital yourself over time, it's not, prohibitive. It's cheap, actually, compared to a whole community being forced onto cable or satellite. A community could then offer 6 or 8 multiplex channels together from one digital box. Remember, I mentioned the digital, you can pack more channels in. Or you could even offer wireless internet. So the CBC transmitters, as well as the towers they're mounted on, are extremely valuable infrastructure throughout rural Canada. So we're very upset that the CBC was just planning to, dismantle them and put them in dumpsters. There was no outreach similar to TVO. So we've mounted a campaign the last month to let communities know. So municipalities, band councils, we've contacted community television organizations, anyone we think might understand the significance of that infrastructure, that if they just ask for that analog transmitter, you can keep the CBC going indefinitely. And if there's a tower available too, or the community wants to do the digital upgrade over time, you can think about offering all these other services. And it's very, very important for rural communities, because if they're, as you know, lots of areas still on dial-up because there is no commercial providers, or there is no cell service, or they've never thought that they could have a community TV or radio channel. So having their own tower and an analog transmitter to get them started is a big, jump up. We talk about being a wired economy and wanting nobody to be left behind. This is really, really important infrastructure.
The acquiring of the tower and the transmitter is just part of the whole system, because you also need a license to broadcast, right? So even if the community got the tower and the hardware of the old analog equipment, and if they even wanted to upgrade it to digital, what is CRTC saying about the license of a group to broadcast?
Well, if the group just wants to keep an analog transmitter going, particularly if it's a low-power transmitter, like it's a small community, they don't even need a license. I forget what the cutoff is, but if it's only broadcasting out to about 12 kilometers and it's below 500 watts or something, don't quote me, I'd have to double-check. But low-power ones, you don't even need a license if you're just rebroadcasting the CBC. All that you would have to do is indicate to Industry Canada that there's been a change in ownership of the transmitter. So if somebody reported they were getting interference or something, Industry Canada just needs to know who owns that transmitter now. If you actually wanted to repurpose that transmitter, so stop using it for the CBC, but reapply to the CRTC for a license for a community channel, then sure, you have to apply for a license, but it doesn't cost anything. The CRTC has been very, it's been very easy to give out community radio and television licenses. It's more about organizing yourself at your end, where you're going to, do your production, or do you have a computer to play it back? It's the production end of it that would be, more to think about than the transmitter itself. It's pretty straightforward.
Or they could just continue broadcasting CBC, you're saying?
Yeah, or they could just, this is our hook, is to get municipalities interested that they can step in if telecommunications companies are not there to offer these services. And does it cost the community? Not on the whole. Because if you think of the fact that, supposing it costs, $2,000 to keep feeding power to that analog transmitter for a year, that's only 4 households having a satellite subscription if they're otherwise cut off. You may say, well, but that's only one channel, the CBC. But that's where it starts to make sense to do a digital upgrade. Digital transmitters start at about $20,000, but it's only a one-time cost that you have to pay. And even $20,000 is only the cost of 4 households, 40 households going on to a satellite subscription for a year. And with that one digital transmitter, you can offer 6, 8, 10 over-the-air television channels. So you could put together a little package that the community votes for, that they most want. And in fact, over 100 communities in Canada already do this. Predating satellite in rural areas, lots of communities put up their own tower. And back in those days, you actually had to buy one analog transmitter up the pole for each service you wanted to bring in. But it's really cheap. Valemont, BC, not far from you. I think I mentioned them before. There's 500 households there. They bring in 6 television channels remotely, 3 radio channels. One of the TV channels is a community channel that they generate local content themselves, and they do that for $40 per household for the whole year. It's less than a tenth of a satellite subscription.
Is that usually the city hall that organizes this community media and puts out the original price and then charges that to the citizens through taxes or somehow?
Yeah, most of the communities doing it have like an arm's length nonprofit association. Like I think in Valemount, it's called the Valemount Entertainment Society, or Band Council does it. But the municipality almost always has to be involved, because if they are going to levy it, they do pay for it out of taxes in Valemount. It's easier than trying to run a subscription service or something. So usually the municipality is involved. So they levy the $40 per household per year, and then it gets remitted to the Entertainment Society. But you can do it both ways. We were clarifying with the CRTC last week. Municipalities normally don't hold broadcasting licenses, but they can, and the CRTC can make exceptions when it's for clearly in the public interest, which it would be if a rural community wanted to keep the CBC going, or an arm's length nonprofit could be set up to run it. It's not a big hurdle.
How do you reach the rural communities? Because this would benefit specifically the rural communities. I mean, there's not much that we can do in big cities like Vancouver or Victoria. But how do you reach those small communities?
You mean to get this message out?
Yeah, to alert them of the possibility of them acquiring these transmitters that the government is shutting down.
So one thing we did was we contacted provincial associations that represent municipalities and asked if they could send out an information pack to their members. Most provincial associations agreed to do that. We don't know how quickly they did it in every case. They may have had to pass it by their board and so on. And then municipalities themselves, some small ones, might only meet once a month. So having time to make a comment before the CRTC's public comment deadline of this Monday might not happen in every case, but we hope it'll be enough time for the message to work its way through by the July 31st shut-off. We just today actually finished sending out messages to more than 3,000 CAP sites. Those are sites where there's free internet, high-speed internet access for rural communities, and also people in big cities that can't necessarily afford internet in their homes.
I heard that recently the CAP Community Access Program got cut off the funding. So
that's right.
That's another thing. Is that CRTC is making this change? Have you found out from some of the commissioners what is the logic, what is the reasoning behind it? The 623 towers that and transmitters that are being shut down, why are they shutting them down instead of, as you said, upgrading them to digital?
Well, as I mentioned, the CBC has over 6 times the number of transmitters out in the field as any other single broadcaster. So the cost is enormous. The digital transition, it costs in the order of at least a couple $100,000. Like in a big city, from a big tower, like a high power transmitter, can be a couple of $100,000 to do the upgrade. So the CBC got a 10% budget cut from the federal government, and what they've been saying is that they would rather put that into content rather than infrastructure. You'd have to debate with CBC executives whether that's a good decision. To me, I feel it's short-lived, because infrastructure you can't get back. Once it's gone, it's gone. Whereas, content is always made in trash. Do you know what I mean? It's turning over all the time. So if we had a couple bad years on content, that could be brought back, but this infrastructure never will. So, I mean, the view from here is that it's a really short-sighted move, but, I'm not the boss of the CBC.
Yeah, it's
what the Broadcasting Act says is that the CBC has to try to reach as many Canadians as possible on the most appropriate method. So that's where there's kind of a judgment call. They're trying to say there's only 1.4% of Canadians that are outside the range of their signals now. But it means that the CBC is becoming a specialty service like TSN or Discovery. You've got to buy a pay TV service to get it, and I don't think that's right.
So it seems like this is a political issue rather than a technological one, because the CBC can say, well, we're doing it because of the cut, the 10% cut,
right.
and that comes from politicians, the finance minister that decided to go on austerity budget. So
that's right.
So how can we fight that? How can we oppose that?
Vote NDP next time. But I mean, in the short term, I think we need to try to save the CBC's infrastructure. And so I think there's an issue here about what happens not only to the CBC towers, but the channels all across the country that used to be for public use. Because as an organization that represents community TV, we've been saying for several years now there should be one channel, one frequency set aside in every community. So a community group could get a community TV license. And that's just not possible in big cities for community TV or radio. All the frequencies are taken. But there's always been one channel set aside for use by the public broadcaster, 2 radio for English and French and 2 TV for English and French. And, you know, we're concerned that that idea of reservation for public use is going to disappear as well going forward. So for a number of reasons, we think it's really important that communities step forward and say, we want that channel and we want that tower.
Mm-hmm. And the community needs to be conscious of what we're losing, because if we are not conscious of it, then nobody cares. And
that's right.
Slowly, like the frogs that boil in the pot, we're slowly...
Well, I think people do care, but they don't know how to articulate what the problem is, right? Mm-hmm. These changes slowly happen, but people don't know why.
Yeah. Well, Cathy, I wish you well in your job. Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
I would say to people that if they want to write in and make a comment about the shutdown of CBC's over-the-air service in their area, they should go to www.friends.ca. That's the site of Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, www.friends.ca/free CBC, free_CBC, as in keep the CBC free. And there's some tips there that kind of recaptures what we've talked about if they want to send a letter into the CRTC with one easy button click. Communities have up until July 31st to approach the CBC directly if they want to ask for the transmitter in their community, and we can help them do that. They can contact CACTUS, and we can put them in touch.
The erosion of our social services has been gradually happening for more than 30 years. So, losing the infrastructure of old technology now, along with the public domain of airwaves, is only the symptom of an ongoing, much deeper social dysfunction. That is, the domination of market economy, where public airwaves are for sale, information becomes not a human right but a commodity. I suggest that there is a disconnect between the majority of citizens and the political representatives who legislate and implement the supremacy of market capitalism. A framework of a solution is written in this booklet, Perpetual Direct Democracy, published by Amazon.com, and you can also read it for free online at pacific.ca. I am Pedro Mora.